Why is it that Donald Trump is a threat to liberty, but George W. Bush wasn't a threat to liberty, or Lyndon Johnson wasn't a threat to liberty, or everybody that preceded him wasn't a threat to liberty, including George Washington made recess appointments for the original reason. They couldn't get people in town. But still, why is it that he gets the focus from National Review, from the AEI, these other Washington institutions, as if he's the great threat? He's not the great threat. That's BS. George W. Bush, remember him? Oh, the great George W. Bush, who all the never-Trumpers love. He appointed 177 recess appointments. Dwight Eisenhower, great general. Democrats used to like him, but not anymore because, you know, he had the mass deportation of illegal immigrants. They just remembered the light bulb. Wait a minute. They actually called it Operation Wetback. I don't call it that. That's what they called it back then. And you know who else called it that? Cesar Chavez, the head of the farm workers union that was hoping to form unions of American farm workers. He hated the illegal immigrants. In fact, he and many of his members would go down to the southern border with flashlights and report to the old INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service. Hey, over here in this sector, you got people coming over from Mexico. And many of them are American Mexicans. Didn't matter. Anyway, I digress. So the point is this. A president needs to be able to push back. Now, some of them will do it in the wrong way. Some of them will do it in a way that damages the Constitution. Trump hasn't done anything yet, other than announce that he plans to do it. Oh, he's going to destroy liberty and separation of powers and representative. It's the opposite. Now, I've taken this position. There are a couple of nominees I'm not that hot on, but who cares? I'm not president. So what do I think? I think this, that with the Schumers of the world, and it's still the never-Trumpers who weren't facing the voters this last election, some of them in the Senate, they shouldn't be the tail that wags the dog. Trump won a landslide. He gave the Republicans a majority in the Senate and held on to the House. I think he should be able to have his team. His team. He believes this is the team that he needs to get things done, to accomplish what he said he would accomplish, in other words, to meet his promises, and he ought to have an opportunity to do it. In 2016, they didn't give him an opportunity to do it. They were undergoing investigations, impeachment hearings, even before he stepped into the Oval Office. Subpoenas were flying all over the place. The media were just brutalizing him. They were slow-walking his nominees. No, he lived through that, and he said, not this time. I get 4 years, that's all I've got. And remember, this is the dug-in Washington, D.C., elite, masterminds, all the rest, who want him to fail. And so my view is if they start picking off the Attorney General candidate, the Department of Defense candidate, and this one and that one, their goal isn't really just to pick off those candidates. It's to weaken Trump. It's to make it more difficult for him to do what he needs to do. So to me, my eyes are wide open about this. I don't think there's any liberty issue or constitutional crisis issue. If there was a constitutional crisis, why didn't we hear about it when Dwight Eisenhower recess appointed 3 Supreme Court justices? Now he would go back and submit them to the Senate Judiciary Committee for hearings and for confirmation, but originally, that's what he did. How about John Bolton under George W. Bush? John Bolton couldn't get a vote in the Democrat Senate to be ambassador to the United Nations. So what did George W. Bush do? He recess appointed him. John Bolton was the acting ambassador to the United Nations for the time he was there because he got recess appointed. We can go through a list of federal district judges who were recess appointed and so forth. So it's not a practice I love, but it's grown into something more than, we're horse and buggy here, coming from Pennsylvania to Washington or originally Philadelphia. And so I get it. I understand what's going on. And one commentator wrote, I think at National Review, that we ought to eliminate this. Well, ought to eliminate this. If you take it out of the Constitution, you have to pass a constitutional amendment. I'm not aware of a great movement out there. Maybe somebody can tell me who leads it to get rid of the recess clause in the Constitution. The Supreme Court in 2014 looked at this issue. I should know. At the time I was president of Landmark Legal Foundation, we filed amicus briefs to try and restrict the recess appointment process. Like I say, I'm not carrying a flag and beating the drums for the recess appointment process, and they did the right thing. They said, look, they put parameters on how long Congress has to be out because of all people, of course, Barack Obama was abusing the process. He said, look, even if they don't recess, if they're not actually meeting when they're in Washington, D.C., like on the weekends, he said, and that's what he did, I'm making my appointments. Now, that's a little crazy, don't you think? And the court said, no, that's not right. But they didn't eliminate it. They didn't torpedo it. It's still there. And so one of these commentators points to Justice Scalia, who said, this is an arcane provision of the Constitution. Presidents are abusing it, the process. And he was very upset about that, Scalia. And then I reminded the person, not directly because he's very thin-skinned, but I posted something. And I said, I take a second seat to nobody in admiration to Antonin Scalia. I worship the guy, the way he thought, the way he wrote, just really a juggernaut. I said, but he also supported the Chevron decision. What was the Chevron decision? To make it as simple as I know how, the Chevron decision was a decision by the Supreme Court that said that massive bureaucracy is constitutional, and when it issues a regulation, it's to be treated as a final law. Wait a minute, what if I want to appeal it and review it? The assumption is that the bureaucracy did the right thing, and the assumption is it's the law. If you can overcome that assumption in court, that's fine, which is almost impossible. It's like proving a negative. Now, why would Justice Scalia sign on to that? Well, several years later, he said it was the worst decision he ever agreed to. That he'd have to do it all over again. He would never do that. And this court, with 6 members, last year, overruled and reversed the Chevron decision in one of the great changes in position of the Supreme Court ever. They said, wait a minute. We're not saying that's constitutional or not, but what we are saying is there is judicial review, and you don't have to overcome the assumption that they're always right. They'll be treated like any other defendant when you bring a lawsuit. That's a big deal. So I raised that only to point out that Justice Scalia himself would acknowledge when he was wrong and so forth and so on. And I'm not even saying he's wrong about the recess appointments clause. I'm just saying the way the tradition has developed over time, Donald Trump isn't creating the practice of a recess appointment for a cabinet officer or any other officer. The issue isn't whether it's a cabinet officer or any other officer. The issue is whether the Constitution provides him with the ability to do it. And as has been the practice, the answer is yes, within limits. So why is it that Donald Trump is a threat to liberty, but George W. Bush wasn't a threat to liberty, or Lyndon Johnson wasn't a threat to liberty, or everybody that preceded him wasn't a threat to liberty, including George Washington, who made recess appointments for the original reason. They couldn't get people in town. But still, why is it that he gets the focus from National Review, from the AEI, these other Washington institutions, as if he's the great threat? He's not the great threat. That's BS. Let's take a listen to this quickly. Go.
President-elect Donald Trump has made clear he wants to fill his cabinet using recess appointments. According to the Center for Presidential Transitions, during Trump's first administration, cabinet confirmations took an average of 30.9 days. Recess appointments would allow Trump to largely avoid that timely process to fill his cabinet.
All right, let's stop. This is BS. It's not on average how long did it take all of his cabinet nominees. It's a handful of them that they targeted and blocked and slow walked. That's the problem. That's what took place. So this is CBS, owned by Paramount, doing their usual lies and their usual propaganda. That's what they did on several of his nominees, and he said they're not going to do it this time. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but he's going to fight back.
For all this and much more, sign up for Levin TV.